Hello and welcome to the THE webinar, Enabling Institution-Wide Digital Transformation Through Better Digital Governance, held in partnership with Pantheon and Sucha. My name is Sridhu and I'm the Deputy Editor for Brand Content at THE. As universities continue to modernize using new digital tools and platforms, the importance of digital governance has grown. We're thrilled to have you here today to discuss digital governance strategies and the key challenges universities face in standardizing their digital presence while enabling innovation. One of the key highlights for today's session is that we're going to hear from our panelists about the digital governance strategy at the University of Cambridge. I'm thrilled to welcome three expert panelists who I know have a lot of insights to share with all of us today. I will now invite them to introduce themselves. Could we start with you, Will?
Yeah, hi, I'm Will Huggins. I'm CEO and co-founder of Sucha. We're a digital agency that work with many higher education institutions to help them develop user-centered solutions to drive digital engagement with their audiences.
Thank you. And Barney?
Morning all. Yeah, hi there, I'm Barney Brown and I work at the University of Cambridge where I'm the head of digital communications and deputy director for communications. I've been here since 2008 and I've had a career spanning web development roles and communications roles.
Thank you. And finally, Josh?
Thank you. Good to be with you all this morning. My name is Josh. I'm a co-founder at Pantheon. As we'll explain, we're a web platform supporting many higher education institutions, helping them leverage open source to solve the problems that we're all going to, or meet the challenges we're all going to talk about.
Thank you. Before we get started, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and we'll share an on-demand video and a summary article with all the participants after the webinar. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you would like to be answered by our panelists. Before we dive into the main discussion, I will hand over to the panel to take us through a brief presentation, which will set the stage for our conversation. So over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Sridhu. So I just want to explain a little bit about what we do and then introduce our two panelists and their roles really quickly, and then we'll drop presentation and get into the conversation, which is what we're all here for. I think the key thing that, as hosts of this, Pantheon, wants to be able to talk about is the idea of helping higher educational institutions really meet the needs of their stakeholders, both external, students, the public, parents, etc., and internal, stakeholders, with a consistent platform that gives everybody what they need. Because it's really important. You have to cultivate your digital estate in this day and age. The reality is that a lot of the work that we do will begin and in some ways progress online. And if it's not high quality, if it isn't be able to give people what they need, people will disengage, right? A poor experience leads people to just close the tab or swipe away, etc. And that will really harm the mission of the institution if we're not able to meet the expectations of visitors and we're not able to empower our stakeholders. Expectations have risen. I like, much like Barney, I've been in this business for, a couple of decades, and I remember the era when, like, I have a website was really the end of the mission, right? Like, you could be found to someone who was searching or who knew a keyword. And the reality today is that the amount institutions spend on their landscaping bills in some ways dwarfs the amount they might spend on their digital presence, and that is something that needs to be readjusted as we think about how we're reaching our student body, our prospective students, and the public at large to achieve the mission of the organization, and that includes both the technologies and capabilities that we are using to literally deliver the experience to those people, and also what we're able to give the people who are part of the campus community who have to create and deliver that content, who are in charge of managing that stuff. And then, of course, there's the underlying layer of what the institution needs from the digital equivalent of its physical plant, which is, is this going to be secure? Is it going to be stable? Is it going to be reliable? Will our brand be represented properly, or will it be malformed? Like, those are non-negotiable requirements in this day and age. And it's a real challenge because oftentimes these things come at a cost. The easiest way to make something secure and stable is to freeze it in amber, to say it's just going to be one thing for everyone all the time, and that doesn't work. Oftentimes, the solutions that historically have been implemented for this are can be very complex and hard to use. So you require a specialized staff to operate these systems, and web developers end up, in the weeds of actually content changes or making a certain headline fit into a certain template, and rather than working on the overall experience. And in those situations, the people who are trying to craft the message, or communicate, or just publish their own research, to be honest, they end up being kind of disempowered and out of the loop. They're not able to actually use the tools directly. They have to work through these other specialized staff. And so, in a world where everyone's figuring it out on their own, it's not very optimal. And that's kind of where Pantheon comes in. We've had, almost 15 years now of helping large research institutions solve this problem at scale, where it's not just one website and, one team. It's hundreds of websites, multiple teams, multiple schools, institutions where there's a tradition of independence and folks making their own decisions, but there's also, again, imperatives for consistency, governance, stability, scale, security, compliance, etc. And we have a unique way of helping people get the best of both worlds under those circumstances. And at the end of the day, what that means is you can move forward more quickly, you can work differently and work together. Most importantly, you can meet all of those requirements that you need to meet, but without actually locking everything down to the extent where it becomes kind of unuseful and slow moving, and the folks in an IT don't need to feel themselves as like the department of no, so to speak. And what that really enables is everyone to work together in a new way and focus on what really matters, right? Like, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do through this medium? What is the web doing for us as a channel? What is the web doing for us as a way that we're reaching people? And how are we all coming together to actually make the most of it? Which is really great. I mean, I think that's one of the things that keeps me really personally engaged and motivated, because we help people. We change the way they work for the better, and that is a wonderful thing to be a part of. We have all kinds of proof on this, independent external research, loads of case studies. You don't have to take my word for it. We'll talk a little bit about it on this panel. But, again, at the end of the day, the whole point here is leveraging the right technology in the right way can really be transformative for these institutions. And that's a really, it's a privilege to be a part of that. So we are here to talk with the University of Cambridge, but Pantheon actually has a wide array of higher education customers around the world who have felt this benefit, again, because of the unique challenges of a diverse institution where there are, not tens, potentially hundreds or even thousands of individual stakeholders, and again, a strong tradition of autonomy. This idea of giving people freedom, but also applying a little bit of a framework to what they're able to do, is, in our experience, really the right recipe for getting the most out of the web. And we're happy to be able to talk about it today. We do that with a particular approach to open source. That's an incredibly important part of what we're going to talk about today, because with open source, you are able to supply that framework, but also give people the freedom. You don't have to kind of cram people into a rigid one-size-fits-all sort of situation. You can give people the ability to own the actual delivery and own the particulars of the medium. But with the Pantheon approach, you can also make people really productive in terms of the workflow and apply the right governance while also, kind of securing the base. Again, like making sure that things are under control, that things will be secured, that they'll scale, etc. And sort of all the stakeholders that are interested in these aspects of the solution can be satisfied. So I think, with that, I'd like to pass it over to Will to talk a little bit about Zucha, and then we'll get the conversation started with Barney. Will, do you want to introduce your practice?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so as I mentioned in my intro, Zucha is a digital agency, and we work particularly with higher education clients, amongst other sectors, in a strategic partnership capacity. So we very much see ourselves as becoming part of the team of the clients that we work with. And effectively, our role is to help them to develop human-centered solutions that help them to achieve their objectives, reach their audiences, and advance their overall strategies. We go to the next slide. We've been going since 2009. I think we're in our 16th year now, and very much the culture and values at Zucha centre around people. So we put people at the heart of our strategy. That starts with our team. So we're very passionate about building the skills and capability in-house and nurturing the talent of our team to be able to provide those expert services for our clients. And those skills span the full array of digital disciplines that will help augment our clients' teams. So everything from early stage digital strategy, user experience design, and creative, through the development and application, implementation, and launching of those products. So, project management, as well as all the technical disciplines, and then working with platforms like Pantheon to enable those applications and websites to be high performance, secure, and continuously improved as they grow and adapt. We, as I say, work very much with higher education, other sectors that we specialize in, public sector, NGO. Effectively, a lot of the commonalities amongst our clients are that they're complex organizations, often with matrix structures, and therefore have quite specific requirements around digital governance, devolved publishing, security management, and those are the areas that our team have developed the skills and expertise in order to be able to provide those solutions. If we go to the next slide, talk about higher education specifically. One of the key elements of our team is, and of Zucha as an organization, is that we've really aligned ourselves with Drupal. We decided that we wouldn't work with other content management platforms. So we're very much a specialist. We're very passionate about being part of the Drupal community. And that's really helped us to align closely with the higher education community because for lots of reasons, Drupal has become very much a kind of platform of choice for higher education institutions. If we go to the next slide, can talk about some of the reasons why that is. So first of all, it is very much a leader in the open web. So open source, open data, which aligns with a lot of kind of universities' digital and technology strategies. It's a very mature platform. So getting on for nearly 25 years now. It has been growing not just as a technical platform, but also as a community, which is really kind of one of the best examples of why open source works, because it brings together people, skills, and different perspectives from all over the world to help contribute to and ultimately build and develop this platform. And it's now become one of the kind of most trusted content management platforms, not just in higher education, but used extensively in governments around the world, and indeed kind of large companies, businesses, and other complex organizations. So again, a lot of common themes around why they choose Drupal. It's scalability, it's flexibility, security, and also the ability for it to provide tailored governance and publishing workflows. Yeah, kind of that gives a little bit of a flavor about why we've really aligned ourselves with Drupal, and also why that's brought us into aligning ourselves with higher education as a sector. And that brings me on, I think, to introduce or let Barney introduce University of Cambridge.
Sure. Thanks, Will and Josh and Sritu. Yeah, University of Cambridge. Hopefully, some of you heard of us. We're a university based in Cambridge. Surprise! We've got about 25,000 students here and just over 12,000 members of staff. It's founded in 1209, and we're fortunate to have had all sorts of exciting alum over the years. And we have all the challenges that most universities have, quite frankly. But we also have this kind of history of the discoveries that have happened as part of the university's history. And it's been a really interesting place to work from 2008, because, of course, if you're trying to get the brightest minds to come and study at a place like the University of Cambridge, you need to be where those minds are. And that doesn't mean just sitting back and waiting for people to turn up. It means having websites that are engaging and easy to use and accessible, but also having useful information available on other channels like TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and Blue Sky and other things like that. So it's been very interesting to see how the university embraces and engages with those sorts of channels where you don't necessarily own the way that they're run, and you can't control fully how your message is crafted and where it gets consumed and how it gets consumed. So there's that sort of appetite for risk that I think is really, really crucial if a university wants to be relevant in this sort of modern era. So yeah, that's where we are. We're a sort of medieval institution that I suppose was set up as a sort of collection of startups, you could call it that, back in 1209, with all these bright minds, and really a lot of the discoveries and successes that have come out of this place have been because people have been able to discuss their various disciplines and smash together their different ways of thinking and ideas to create new discoveries and poke away at questions where they don't necessarily know what the answer is going to be, but they want to explore and discover. So when you talk to people like that and say, okay, well, where the web is concerned, we want you to all do everything in exactly the same way, it's very counter to that way of thinking. So that's where we are at the moment, is exploring how do you find the balance between, as Josh was saying, kind of sharing ways of doing things, but also allowing that kind of freedom of expression.
Thank you. And thank you for getting our conversation started with that brilliant presentation. Of course, we'll talk a lot more about Cambridge later. But before we do that, I want to start with the challenges and barriers that universities face when it comes to managing their digital presence. So what are some of the common challenges that institutions face in managing their digital estate? Can we start with that? Who would like to get us started?
Yeah, go for it.
So you're really the expert, Barney, but I can say from the broad view, we're very happy to be here today, and that you framed the question really lovely in sort of your introduction of Cambridge. What I've seen as a common challenge across these institutions is just that, like the tension between, essentially freedom to do what you want or do what you need to do to further your inquiry, which is at the root of most of these institutions, right? They start from this place of, we have to find the truth, and that means we need to chart our own path, and we're on a journey of discovery. And then on the flip side, there's someone in like a communications role usually who says, yes, but like we are one institution with one name and one logo and potentially one footer for all of our websites so that people can find the things that they need from the institution. And the reality is, it's actually very interesting to me. I actually would be curious to hear from you where, if like where the origins of the web at Cambridge got started. I remember talking with one of my colleagues in the States who would they was they're an older institution for us anyway, not 1200s, but old for the U.S. And he was talking about how we were really in this at the beginning. We had one of the first websites, the first 1,000 websites that ever existed, and our at the time my IT leader had it rigged up so that every time there was a visit to the website, there was a literal little bell that would ring in his office, and there'd be a little ding because someone had come to the website and visited that version of their campus. And of course now, like, that would just be like a ringing off the hook. But actually being early into this medium creates a unique set of challenges because everyone already has something in a sense, and you're constantly working to modernize. Again, like I brought up that landscaping comparison at the very beginning, but like it is sort of interesting to think about your digital presence and your digital estate as a kind of analog to the real world presence and the real world estate, where you have these buildings, you have these grounds and so forth, and they've been around for a long time, and you need to both preserve what is true and a part of the institution forever, and modernize, because like inquiry always pushes us forward and things are always moving forward. And I think that this one of the central things that these institutions face, that is, it's not unlike what a big organization feels, but it is different from what like a corporate context demands, is balancing these two different imperatives.
I'd be quite keen, if it's all right, to just quickly share. Here we go. Can you all see that? So
Wow.
this is from 1997. So this was our first, well, this is the earliest version of our website that the Wayback When Machine, hat tip to them, have captured. And I love it actually because it's very user-centered. We've got general information about who built the web server, how do you get in contact with the computer service department at the time that built it? And then information about the university in the Cambridge area, and then other information sources, our phone number, which probably still works, but don't all phone it right now, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I find that interesting is because, yeah, we were there really early on, because you sort of think, if something is possible, let's try it out, particularly from an IT perspective. And I suppose for many of our institutions, to go back to 3T's question, the origins of our presence on the website would have been thanks to the hard work and explorations of developers and computer departments. So information was kind of made possible and shareable through a technical process, and then the kind of ethos of the web, of information being free and accessible to all. And so the structures and ways that information was shared back then were with that in mind. And then I suppose many of our institutions have then grown organically over the years. And that's how our web presences have grown as well, in academic institutions that rightly allow kind of freedom of expression, and departments have different approaches to doing things and have different challenges. And particularly in research intensive institutions, there's the need to be able to have researchers communicating to researchers in other departments. I grew up in Cambridge, and in the early 80s, I was like in a thing called the Cub Scouts, right? And we got taken into a department in Cambridge and shown this old CRT monitor, and somebody dialed in to have like a text chat with another researcher, and it would have been sort of green text on a black screen. And my mind was blown. I didn't understand that this text that was coming on the screen was coming from another human being out there somewhere. And that would have been that very early, even probably that was before this website that you can see here. So I know that it would have been running through the blood of the university, including, if you Google it, the origins of the first ever webcam were at the University of Cambridge as well, which you're probably all aware of, which was a camera trained on a coffee pot to see if it was in need of refilling or not. So universities, I suppose, have always had people that are interested in pushing ideas and exploring new methods of sharing communication. So that's why it's difficult for us, because we were there at the start. But of course, if you were to go to an institution now and say, here's a whole new channel, like, for example, Blue Sky or YouTube or something like that. It'd be very easy to see how everybody else is using it, think about what's the cost of using it, what are the risks, and have a kind of an accelerated, mature approach to using it, which when you're in a medium that is growing whilst you're using it is very difficult. A bit like, you know, when color came into the cinema or sound, you know, everybody was kind of exploring that. And now we've got stuff like VR, right? And also institutions kind of grappling with how do you use AI kind of ethically. There's that frontier, of course, not just generative AI, but also kind of to increase efficiencies without causing some kind of carbon crisis where you've just got your whole workforce to burn a hell of a lot of energy that we didn't used to burn. So
yeah,
those are some of the things I think from my perspective.
I think that you know, really exemplifies actually one of the big challenges, you know, which is back in the 90s, you know, having a web page, you know, was innovation. You know, it was putting you at the cutting edge. It was probably done by quite a small team who could really control, you know, or even probably an individual who could, you know, kind of really control the output. You know, now with the, you know, the speed and extent of the technology shift, the challenge for organizations like University of Cambridge is, you know, how do you continue to be at the cutting edge, but operating that kind of innovation at scale now, where, you know, literally everybody in the university is probably using cutting edge technology on a daily basis. But how do you do that in a way that's, you know, organized, coherent, secure, and delivering value as well? And I, you know, it's I think that's a significant challenge.
Well, and actually, just to before we move on to the next question, I think, Barney, one of the things you mentioned that's really salient is this idea of all the other channels. I was just talking, you know, you mentioned AI. I was just talking with a colleague of mine yesterday about, you know, this week was Google's developer conference and they just announced a whole slew of new things. And there's many different companies that are building towards, you know, this future of agents being the means of discovery for a lot of information. You know, which in some ways is you know, has a lot of caveats and potential risks and so forth. But, you know, broadly speaking, also reminds me a lot of the original kind of rise of social and these other channels where organizations, institutions, and ambitious individuals need to be present, right? You have to be in these spaces in order to engage the public, but you also need to bring them back to your space, right? And the web really is where you can own the digital terrain, right? Like I use this analogy sometimes when I talk with people, and they're rightly very focused on these other channels, but I you know, you don't want to build your whole operation on these other places because they can shift on you actually quite quickly. Like you don't build your house on rented land, and the web is the place where you can actually own the experience. And it's really crucial, as Will, you were pointing out. It's not the early days of the web where there's going to be one web page built by one or two people for an institution. Like we're really in an era where for a large scale organization to operate in the most effective way, you have to be able to empower literally, I mean, hypothetically, although not practically, everyone in that sort of, you know, campus community, every stakeholder to, if they want to, if they will put in a little bit of effort on their side, to own their own piece of that, you know, digital terrain. And so that, you know, to get back to the original question, that just becomes a really challenging thing when you have that many stakeholders that you're trying to serve.
Thank you. We've touched on fragmented and siloed digital systems in the presentation. So could we talk a little bit further about how challenges like these impact universities' ability to deliver cohesive and user-centric web experiences? And what are the main benefits of adopting a standardized digital governance model, I guess, in response?
I would say that if we take something like the student journey, so we've got a bright sixth form student or equivalent from around the world who wants to be a physicist, and they see Cambridge as the place that they want to study that. Fantastic. We love to hear from them. And so they may Google physics at Cambridge, or they might ask ChatGPT, how do you study at Cambridge? And if they went through the web route, if they were lucky at the moment, they would get through to the course information, and then they would be able to find out how they would study here and the intricacies of applying to study at Cambridge. But the truth is, because of our estate, of which we have over 2,000 websites at the moment, when we last tried to map that potential user journey and recording how people had tried to complete a task like that, our walls were just filled with this long user journey map. And there were so many different touch points that a potential student may have to go through in order to get the information they needed. And that was a product of what we were talking about earlier, of that sort of organic estate that has grown up, where different bits of the institution have dealt with their part of that journey as well as they can do in their isolated area or siloed area. But they haven't been able to take a step back and say, look, if we were going to wipe all of this away and start from a user first approach, how would we design the optimal user journey for somebody that wants to apply to study here? And we don't have that yet, but that is certainly where we want to get to. By having more centralized approaches, we can start to have better ways of sort of measuring that journey more effectively and incrementally improve it. Hopefully, in our cases, we want to reduce the number of websites we have, reduce the amount of content that we have, so that if people come searching for particular things, they find a more reliable single source of truth that for us is easier to then maintain either at a departmental level or a central level.
Yeah, and I think that is really, I think that's one of the core points, which is what the outside perception of the website is versus the internal pathway to publishing it. So if you're a student and you're looking for course information on clinical medicine, but then you also want to find out a little bit about Cambridge as a place to live, you kind of want to be able to hop between the two. They're not that, as a user, you're not necessarily seeing them as discrete websites. You're seeing them as the university, and you're trying to consume different bits in your journey towards making a decision. So again, providing some governance to help the different teams that are responsible for producing those different bits of content to do it in a way that is consistent, that's using best practices for accessibility and for search engine optimization and internal navigation, I think is really important. But doing it in a way that reduces friction for those teams, so that they're not kind of constantly coming up against barriers that prevent them from doing their job, but also equip them rather than restrict them, so that they can still use their kind of innovation and imagination to bring to life the content that they're publishing. But they can do that within a framework that enables it to then ultimately fit into the overall journey and structure of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I think, Will, like you make a really good point. I see the thinking, those of us who have been in the industry for a long time, we think about like the website or this website or that website, and the reality of people who are on the other side of the screen, they don't really think that way, to be honest. They're searching for things, they're seeing things, and they're in these other channels, and then they're saying, "Oh, that looks interesting. I want to know more." And they're tapping or clicking a link or a call to action or an image or something like that, and it just brings them another experience. They don't really think of this as like, I'm going to visit the website of I want to go look at the website of the university. They're like, I have a question about the university, I would like the answer, or I saw something interesting about the university, I'd like to know more. And it's just the web as a medium and as a channel is kind of the dominant um, uh, medium for digital experiences, for user experiences, for software interfaces. And this is just the sort of the medium that we use to communicate in this way. And as it grows, as that becomes more and more interweaved, right, there's not really a meaningful distinction between online and offline at this point. It's all just our lives. It's actually funny. I was thinking when you were talking, Barney, just yesterday I was trying to navigate this. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She's on the swim team in our town. There are 4 separate websites that I have to use to figure out what's going on with the swim team, between like the pool's website, the team's website that manages the schedule, the separate team's website that manages the information about like swim meets and other stuff, and then a fourth website that's about volunteering and donations. And they're all on different platforms. They all don't share a login. They're all like, as an end user, I'm just like, these are radically different. There's no consistency between anything. It's very hard to know what lives where, and that's just for a swim team in a relatively small town. And that's the challenge, is that like you need to use this medium in many different contexts to engage with the people who are part of your community and a part of what makes it work. And the ability, and I think getting to like the value, Will, you spoke earlier in intro of Drupal and open source more generally, to create software that can be flexible enough to move between these different modalities, but also maintain some consistency and have it work similarly out of the box, so that you can present both to internal and external stakeholders something of a unified experience, that just makes it easier for the humans to navigate. Like that's really where the value is. That's where the magic happens, I think. And it's so important when you have the scale of a digital estate that somewhere like Cambridge has.
Building on that point, it's that designing digital governance frameworks is not just about setting policies from the top down. It's also about ensuring the right people are involved in shaping those policies. Who are the different teams that need to be engaged in designing this framework so that there's a participation and adoption?
Will, do you want to, I mean, this is kind of your practice area. Do you want to speak to who you engage in your practice when you're thinking about, how this technology works for a big institution?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ultimately, the teams that you want to engage are the end users within the organization, so the people that actually have to publish things. And one of the commonalities we see across the different sectors that we work in, and so higher education, National Health Service, and local government, I think are the ones I'd highlight, is they're often organizations that have discrete teams who have accountability and often budgets, and they need to be able to publish and engage with their audiences. And if the central tools don't work for them, or aren't enabling them to do what they need to do, then they'll go and source it from somewhere else. And we see, and then you get a very fragmented approach to technology management, brand management, publishing. But it happens, and you can totally understand why it happens. So for us, it starts with engaging with those teams. So it's kind of understanding what are their needs, and what are they currently using to fulfill them, where are the gaps, and what could be done better. So it's everybody from kind of, and the different teams will have different job titles, obviously, but a kind of webmaster, perhaps within a faculty or within a department. Bigger teams might break those roles into things like content designer, editor, kind of different job titles, but then also working up to department heads. So understand actually where does the website fit into the overall communications plan and strategy for their department, and then through to the kind of, if you like, the supporting teams, so IT, marketing, communications, and then perhaps even some of the back office functions where there's systems that need to be integrated. So it's really about trying to get that as broad a reach as possible into the disparate teams that all have a stake in either the input or the output of the web strategy.
Barney, could I also get your perspectives on this? Could you tell us
Yeah,
more?
sure thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
please go ahead.
thank you, Tracy. So I would agree that with all the people that Will just mentioned, definitely. And in my experience, it's if you open the door and say, as we are at the moment, you know, we're confident with our approach that we're taking at the moment with your support up to the end of next year to get our nearly 500 websites shifted from Drupal 7 into Drupal 10 and 11. But, you know, beyond next year, we obviously want to have a strategy that the university can adopt for an even more mature approach to digital governance and how we look after our content and present it to people. And so that means, of course, involving content designers and user experience experts and heads of institutions. But in a way, we need to make sure that we involve pro-vice chancellors in the university as well, up to the vice chancellor, because in many ways we're trying to, I say we, myself and others that care deeply about this, we're trying to get the university to understand and formally adopt that responsibility that comes with creating content and sharing it with the world through digital channels. And in a way, it's something that sort of, it's been assumed as something that people have to look after in institutions across the University of Cambridge. And in many cases, we have departments that if you were to look at who works in that particular department, they wouldn't have somebody called a web editor, but they might have somebody who's an administrator who's already working across a lot of other different areas of the department. But then they also have to edit the website as an addition to their additional responsibilities. And so sometimes it can be difficult to find who are all the people who day to day have to have the skills in order to create effective content that's accurate, and they have enough time to do that in a way that's helpful for our end users. So it is a challenge finding the right people. Whenever I put a call out to say, you know, we're about to look at what's going to happen for the next 5 years, would anybody be interested in helping that discussion move it forward? We get hundreds of people wanting to come along to workshops and things like that. So we're certainly not short of people wanting to get involved, and they care deeply about it. But from my perspective, I like to try and think about, from a governance perspective, in other areas of the university's history and business, how has change been affected? What are the various committees that you need to go to in order to affect that kind of change? If we need investment for better infrastructure to build websites and analyze how they're working, where does that source of funding come from, and who do you need to talk to in order to make the case for that to be available? If there are roles across the institution that contribute towards that, how can we make sure that those roles are given the time they need to learn the skills? And we have a fantastic, what we call a community of practice, called the Content Community of Practice, that has a vast array of resources for our staff across the university to learn about creating accessible content, user-centered design approaches to laying out landing pages and things like that. And they have very good turnout, but then you need to make sure that those staff that go to those kinds of events have the time in their roles to then actually practice what they've learned. So we kind of need everybody involved, quite frankly, with governance. But for it to work, we need to get to a position where we can make decisions that don't make everybody happy. And I think a lot of where we've come from, I think you were talking about the Department of No, the idea of an IT department that has to say no to things because they're not possible from the past. We've actually adopted, or we now have a digital estate that comes from a wonderful department of Yes, really. If we think about that whenever it was, 1990s website that I shared earlier, it was a great sort of seen as a great honor to be able to fire up a website so easily. In those days, it would have been, flat HTML on a web server, and the person that wrote that probably went out and bought the components and built the web server that it was hosted on and plugged it into one of our buildings. And when content management systems became available, the fact that we could just type in a department or a research group or an academic and get a website within minutes, it seemed like the obvious thing to therefore do. And we've all been talking so far today about technology and governance around that. But actually, what we're trying to do now at the university is, rather than saying yes, we want to say, what are you trying to achieve? Because it might be that technology isn't the answer to your problem and what you're trying to explore. I'm working in a building that was, I'm sitting in a building right now that was built in 1347. We've got a lift shaft that was built, I think, in the 1930s. Now, if I get stuck in that lift, occasionally it will have issues. I'm not going to go to my mobile phone and go to Twitter or X, as it is, and put out a message saying I'm stuck in a lift. So some people do that. I'm going to press the button on the lift that says, in the event of a failure, press this button. But a bit like Josh's point earlier about the swim teams, I think many of us are jumping to use technology to solve a problem, and particular technologies to solve a problem, without pausing and thinking, what is my situation right now and what would be the best way to solve it? In the case of websites, if people come asking for one, and this is part of our kind of governance approach, we now want to ask them, what are you trying to achieve? You are aware that we have 2,000 websites over here. Is there a place that your information could better slot into? And not just say yes.
Yeah, I think the really key thing through that is, start with the why. Like, the what are we trying to achieve? What is our aim? What is our goal? And that's going to be, again, different depending on, who the stakeholders are. Like, there's probably a fair amount of commonality between researchers who are trying to make their information available to the public, but that's, that there's lots of other folks that have different aims or ends within a campus. And one of the things that I see, across our customer base is it's a privilege to be on, with the University of Cambridge, and Barney, you're dialing in from a building from the 1300s, and I'm sure, like, the truth is that the student who wants to study physics at the University of Cambridge already knows the name and is going to figure out how to do it, like, even if it's hard. But there are a lot of other institutions out there where they're actually they're very focused on making it very, very easy because they're in a more competitive environment, if you will. There are institutions where they're really thinking about how they are cultivating their alumni network and so forth because they're trying to build things up. Or there's institutions, or Will, to your point, where there's a will, there's a way. And if the tools that the centralized organization provides don't meet my needs, I'll just figure it out where, you've gotten a grant to do something interesting, to do something innovative, and that has a life in the digital space that we all inhabit. They're just going to do it, and so it really, that is the understanding the diversity of needs, and then figuring out what are the things that we can provide in common. How can we make people, it's actually like kind of like we don't want to be the department of no. We can't just be the department of yes, whatever. It has to be the department of, like, what are you trying to do, and does this work for you? And having that be both a thoughtful what are you trying to accomplish, and then a really useful, is this answer, can you be part of this thing that already exists? That's really where the magic happens, like that kind of bringing people into the fold, but also meeting them where they are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also it's worth acknowledging that higher education in the UK in particular is under a huge amount of pressure financially as much as anything, and not every institution is has the profile and the history that the University of Cambridge does, and so kind of doing more with less is becoming more of an imperative. So again, kind of helping teams to be able to achieve their goals. And it goes absolutely to your point, Barney, which is about trying to encourage them to brief their problem rather than come to you with a brief for a solution they've already kind of predetermined, because that's where I think central teams and us as a strategic partner, that's where we can really help sort of understand the problem and then actually start to guide what the options are in terms of providing a solution, and then honing that down into something that meets their budgets, needs, timescales. Because I think a lot of the clients that we work with, it is a really tough environment that they're operating in now, and so they're trying to be cutting edge, they're trying to be innovative, they're trying to deliver best-in-class digital experiences in a really competitive market, and they're trying to do it in a financial environment that is as the toughest it's ever been. So again, that's where technology should be an enabler if you approach it in the right way.
Speaking more about finding the right technology and doing more with less, we've touched on open source a few times. Where does the value of open source fit into a digital governance strategy? And is there anything particular about Drupal that lends itself really well to supporting universities? I guess, where could I come to you on this point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think overall, one of the things that is a good synergy, I think, with higher education and open source is the idea of community. Higher education institutions are, fundamentally, they're communities. They're either communities of academic excellence, they're communities of students. They're very much, their proposition is very much one of community, one of knowledge growth and sharing and expansion. They're kind of almost baked into the very notion and proposition of what a university is, and that's very much where open source is flourishing from, is that ability to coordinate knowledge, insight, and expertise across geographies and communities, to bring that together, and align it against a single mission. So I think there's that kind of cultural alignment that just has a nice synergy. And then I think on a practical level, I think there's probably two areas where I think open source really meets the needs of higher education institutions. One is in terms of total cost of ownership. So obviously, being open source and free from commercial licenses doesn't mean there's no cost to it. But what it does mean is that you're much more in control of how you want to guide the budgets and how you want those costs to be directly associated with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So I think that's one really important one. And I think the other one is back to something that Josh mentioned earlier about building your house on rented land. By building your technology stack using open source components, you're freeing yourself from kind of some of the vendor tie-ins and lock-ins that might restrict your ability to scale, restrict your ability to adapt and change course or service emerging requirements. So I think that really has a lot of resonance with the needs of universities, and then for Drupal specifically, obviously, ultimately it is a content management framework. It's there to help people publish to the web, and I think where Drupal has really carved its differentiator from other content management systems and from other open source platforms is the ability to be really targeted with how you want to build the permission layer. So you can have a structure where you have very close central control, but very clear devolved publishing workflows. And I think, again, that's an area that's had real resonance with a lot of complex organizations, but in particular higher education institutions.
Yeah, I could say, like, to pick up on that, I think where everything you said, Will, about open source and sort of like the values of ownership and real ownership is true. And certainly, free from commercial licenses doesn't mean free from a budget perspective, right? And I always think like it's a tough budgeting environment, but I always keep coming back to, and I talk about this with our customers. Again, think about it. What's the landscaping bill for the university? And how much do we spend on our physical estate? And I'm not saying you should spend as much on the digital estate, but you know, compare the two, because they're increasingly, that if you get a chance to speak to the people who get to allocate those things and so forth, really think it through, because the it's a tough budgeting environment in general. But if you think about the why and what really matters, the shortchanging technology budgets is usually not a smart answer. Like, we should all be careful with how we're spending our money, but like, compare the two. But to the question of Drupal, like, I think you're right, that where Drupal has carved its differentiation out is, with the ability to, manage something that's more than simple, pages and posts, right? So, permissions, but also like more complex data models. Certainly, like the ability to publish things in multiple languages, being a native part of the platform, is a huge thing. The other thing I would mention, and it gets back to where Pantheon also really enables Drupal to be its finest. People get the most out of their Drupal investment with our platform. Is that idea of a history of a distribution-centric mechanism for leveraging the software. So again, where you don't have, again, maybe 2,000 websites is too many, but one website is too few, right? The idea that you're going to have a website with one way it works for everyone on the campus, it's just not ever going to happen. And so Drupal lets you kind of like, you don't just use Drupal, right? Because if you use just an open source tool, it's a little bit how like humans and fruit flies have 70% of the same DNA. What you think about is your Drupal distribution with your brand included, some native things that integrate with the systems on campus, but then delivered not as a single instance that everyone has to share, a monolith, but a distribution that the campus can adopt. That we've seen as being a really successful pattern for, again, finding the balance in all these tensions of governance.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left. So my final point to wrap up our conversation is about, almost from a future gazing perspective, is that we know that digital governance isn't a one-time project. So how can universities be more proactive in evolving their digital presence with changing user expectations?
Barney, you should take us home on this.
All right. Well, let's talk about landscaping. I think it's important that institutions take responsibility for their digital estate, much in the same way that they do for their physical estate. And you can pin that on a couple of very key things, like, for example, accessibility and security. And we need to realize that we are all custodians of our digital estates, much in the way that we are our physical estates, and they are as important. If there was an accessibility ramp into one of our buildings and it was left to deteriorate and it was no longer able to be used, and the head of that particular institution said there's no point in fixing it because we only get 4 or 5 people a year that need to use it, there would be legal ramifications there and they would be held to account. And I want those heads of institutions to have that same responsibility for digital accessibility. So get them to learn the importance of their digital estate and that it's not going anywhere. It's an estate that we own and we can control the information that is on it. which goes to the points that have been made today about the importance of open source. We shouldn't let go the value of controlling our own truth on our own platforms.
That brings us to the end of today's discussion. A big thank you to our panelists for sharing such valuable insights, and to all of you in the audience for joining us and taking part in the conversation. We hope you're leaving with some useful takeaways. We will share the recording of this webinar and a post-event summary article with you in the coming days. Thank you once again, and goodbye.